Good evening. Welcome to the Wednesday night edition of Newsmax Prime. I'm J.D. Hayworth. Of prime interest tonight, from speaking to voting on the speakership. House Republicans met in conference this afternoon to select their choice for the top job. They'll officially install the new speaker in a floor vote tomorrow. The GOP selection, despite a good bit of conservative consternation, is Wisconsin Congressman Paul Ryan.
This begins a new day in the House of Representatives. John Boehner served with humility and distinction, and we owe him a debt of gratitude. But tomorrow, we are turning the page. We are not going to have a House that looked like it looked the last few years. We are going to move forward. We are going to unify. Our party has lost its vision, and we're going to replace it with a vision.
Speaker-designate Paul Ryan. For more on this election, we're pleased to be joined by Newsmax Chief Washington correspondent John Gizzi, who fittingly joins us from Newsmax Washington. So, John, here it is. Ryan put the votes together. A lot of conservatives, especially those in the Freedom Caucus, had their concerns. What have you heard about what went down earlier this afternoon?
Well, had Kevin McCarthy, the majority leader, stood for Speaker, he would have had more than 40 votes cast against him. One source told me more like 60, which would have meant that many of them would have voted tomorrow for a candidate other than Republican McCarthy for Speaker, and without a majority, that would have delayed the vote. This will not happen, of course, with Paul Ryan. Most of the groups who stayed with his remaining opponent, Freedom Caucus candidate Dan Webster of Florida, are in all likelihood going to vote for the former vice presidential candidate for Speaker, and he will win on one ballot tomorrow. That was likely the result of Ryan being a national figure, not disliked by the party, a good face. At 45, he's the youngest Speaker since Henry Clay, who won the job in his 30s as a freshman, and the recognition that a protracted fight would not be good for the party in the eyes of the national press.
John, you and I know a major sticking point on Ryan as Speaker is his embrace of amnesty and notorious Democrat member Luis Gutierrez. Now, I understand that he told some of the border hawks he would not contemplate a vote on amnesty until 2017. Do you really expect him to soft pedal that part of the establishment agenda?
Yes, I do, and I'll tell you why, J.D. Aside from the fact it's an election year, he would face an open rebellion by many of those who voted reluctantly for him, knowing full well the objection you raise, namely immigration as an issue with him. Another thing is that he would have concerted opposition not only within his own conference, but on the full House floor if such a measure got there. He doesn't need this kind of aggravation. One final point. The Speaker is primarily a process-driven official, someone who must handle the needs of committee chairmen and individual members, as well as the rules of the House. I frankly thought Paul Ryan was not well suited to this, Ryan being a policy guy. We will see how he deals with his new role when he wields that gavel.
And there's right now the rhetorical equivalent of a huge mud puddle which he has stepped into, because just yesterday, John, Paul Ryan was talking about how the process stinks in terms of this budget vote, the last deal that John Boehner put together. And yet today, Paul Ryan steps up and says, I'm voting for that deal. That's not exactly the way you want to start your speakership, is it?
No, it isn't. And again, this is just pure conjecture from watching the debate and watching the member. That deal was going to go through regardless of what a speaker or a majority leader or anyone did. It's a bad deal, say those on the right. The cherished causes of defunding Planned Parenthood and scrapping the XM Bank just never came into fruition. Now, what I suspect Paul Ryan means is, let's get it behind us and start fresh. Let's turn the page and go back and revisit issues, but without threatening the full faith and credit of the United States, which a shutdown would eventually do. I'm only guessing this. I know that, and you know as someone who lived through 1998, that the idea of just getting things behind you by acquiescing to the other side is very, very fragile. Newt Gingrich did that when he just wanted to adjourn and gave Bill Clinton everything, and the base stayed home in the midterm elections. That could well be a problem for the new speaker.
Gave us quite a scare in 1998. I will never forget getting word after doing some media interviews, but before the votes were counted, that the Republican Party was in danger of losing the House. It did not happen that night, but it was a close thing indeed. For history, your perspective, and what may be ahead, John Gizzi, you have our thanks. We appreciate your perspective.